Welcome to Media and Monuments Podcast, presented by Women in Film and Video in Washington, D.C. Media and Monuments is conversations featuring industry pros speaking on a wide range of topics of interest to media makers.
Welcome to the WIF Media and Monuments Podcast. I'm Steve Lack, a member of the WIF Communications Committee, and today we'll be listening to a presentation we gave on how to get the best sound for your production as part of our Wednesday 1 programming. We talked about all things audio, including how to choose a location, things to think about with your costumer, how to pick the right mics, and post-production issues when it comes to sound. So get out your notebooks because a lot of really great tips are coming your way right now. Hello, everybody. I'm Steve Lack, and I'm here with Cheryl Ottenritter at House Audio, which is one of the coolest Atmos rooms on the East Coast, if not the coolest Atmos room on the East Coast. And with Donna Garekis. Cheryl is the senior mixer and founder at House Audio, and for over 20 years, she has been working with PBS, TV One, Nat Geo. I mentioned her Dolby Atmos room. She's doing a lot of Atmos mixing and film projects here out of the studio. So Cheryl's amazing. And Donna Garekis works at Henninger Media as a mixer recordist, and she's also a freelance location sound mixer and sound operator. What we're going to talk about tonight is what you need to know about sound. And my feeling as a sound person is sound is as important as lighting to capture your vision and to make your project work. So one of the things we'll be talking a lot about is location and how to choose the right location and what to do when you get there to get everything you need recorded. Another staple, especially in the DC area, is recording interviews. So we'll talk about the best way to capture interview audio and talking head audio. Something that a lot of people don't think about is costuming considerations for sound. Clothes can be really noisy, and we deal with a lot of that in post. And then we'll move on to my favorite subject, which is gear. You don't have to spend a fortune, but you can, and many of us have. A really important topic is what you can and can't fix in post. So yeah, there's no one button you can push to fix poorly recorded audio. So that's really what we want to focus on. And then the final thing will be planning for your post-production audio needs. Sound design, music. Are you going to need ADR? Are you going to need Foley? What are your deliverables? What does your mixer need to know? Those are all really important things that don't get thought of until the last minute. And so it's good to think about that in advance. So let's start with considerations when scouting a location. I like to say develop an ear for locations as well as an eye. Filmmakers will look around and constantly be going, that'd be a great place to shoot. Oh, the lighting's great here. Well, you also have to pay attention to the acoustics of an area and what the sound of the location sounds like. I did a film once where they were actually shooting right in front of the James River, and it was difficult.
I bet.
Or in a parking garage. Parking garages are always trouble, and we'll talk a little bit about techniques to mitigate that, or a busy downtown area. So you have to think about what issues you can anticipate. If you're shooting in a big building, in a big office building, that the air conditioner is going to be kicking on and off during your interview. Maybe there's a contact at the location that you can get in touch with in advance that can help you with turning the AC off during your shoots or controlling that. Same thing with a humming refrigerator in an office or a break room or somewhere. Can it be unplugged? Donna, do you have any tips on like how to shoot in a parking garage or throwing a blanket over the refrigerator or things like that you've done on location?
I've been lucky enough to not have shot in a parking garage yet, although I feel one day it will come. But I have done some short films, like in a house with a very large entryway where it's tile or marble floors, really high ceilings, and it's very echoey. So definitely sound blankets are a great way to try and dampen that noise. Either throwing some carpets on the ground, some blankets on the ground. They can be legitimate sound blankets that are marketed as such, or you can also go with moving blankets. They've got some weight to it and they're really large and a good way to kind of get a sound blanket, but on a budget. Those are definitely helpful. I also ended up getting a pair of cheap T stands so that I can hook the sound blankets on the T stands and angle them how I need to. So I'm not having to hang it up like on somebody's wall or be relying on stationary things around me to throw the blankets over. So I try and keep that around with me. And then also too, which I know we'll talk about a little later, but just always keeping the mic as close to the speaker as I possibly can. That definitely helps with decreasing reflections. If, a boom operator is pretty far away from the talent or even just, 6 inches too far away from the talent, those echoes in a reverberating space can really accentuate. So just getting as close as you can helps a lot too.
Yeah, getting that mic in there. Yeah. How do you deal with them when you get post audio and it was shot from 10 feet away?
Well, I go to lab at that point. I listen to all the mics and see which one is the best option. And oftentimes, and I know that we're going to talk about this, the lab is too noisy to use for whatever reason. And too much clothing, too much whatever, too much rustle. I do usually go to the boom first and I like to see if the boom sounds good. And if it's too far away, a lot of times what you can do is you can actually run it through different types of plugins like Isotope RX has a decent, you can take some dialogue isolate, you take some of the room out of it. You can actually, I like to use EQ around the 6K area, depending on the talent and how it was recorded. Sometimes if you notch out a little bit of room out of the voice without even running it through a processor, just run it through EQ, it helps. It really does. Sometimes, a lot of times, a boom too far away, you'll get a tubby sound. So maybe just a little scoop in the lower end. But using plugins to deal with problems in the wrong hands can be worse than the problems to begin with. So you have to be careful if you're, say, an editor or an independent filmmaker doing your own sound. Just keep everything in moderation and really don't go overboard with that type of stuff. Otherwise, you could be causing more problems. And there's different things that you can do to bring out a boom that's too far away. Say the same technique with the camera mic, but just a little bit more of it with the camera mic. So say everything fails, your boom fails, your lav fails. Oh, only thing we got there is a camera mic, but that soundbite is really important, and it is. It's important to the story. It's crucial. It's a crucial bite or a crucial line. You have to have it in there. You can't do ADR for whatever reason, or if it's an interview for a doc, And there's lots of different things you can do to fill out a camera mic. But we really don't want it to.
Right. Yeah. Which is the whole point of tonight's presentation. Here's how you don't have to do that.
Right.
Right. Be aware when you're scouting locations, is there an airport nearby? Or is there a fire station or a hospital, on the same block or right up the street where ambulances are going to be going by while you're shooting? Are you shooting in an area where there's construction projects working during the time you're shooting? You need to take your scheduling into consideration in those areas and heavy traffic areas. So these are things when you're scouting locations and you're thinking about putting your shots together to keep in mind so that you can get the best sound possible and avoid some of these issues later on down the line. This is what I preach.
Preach to the choir.
That sound. When you're on a shoot, always record at least 30 seconds of room tone, natural sound at the location. And every time you change the setup, do it again and make sure everybody on the set keeps quiet during it, but it will save you hours in post. And be aware of changes to the environment. So as you shoot, you'll notice a changing light. So you also need to notice the changing sonic environment. Listen for birds, insects, wind, weather. And be aware as you shoot of how these things might affect your editing choices later or cause you to spend more time in post. So that's why you want to get that nat sound every time you have the opportunity.
And it's not just the 30 seconds. For instance, if you're doing a film where you know that you're going to want to grab more and fill it out, your nat sound, either an independent feature or a doc, say, or even especially a nature doc, go ahead and like, while you're scouting out and setting up your camera and doing your lighting, let the sound person go off and record, the sound. And then you can lay that in. And even if you end up not using it or you end up sound designing more, you can lay in that nat as a texture, and it just adds so much more realism to what you're trying to do. And it's so nice to get natural sound that's recorded properly when you're trying to mix and fill out any type of program, whether it's a short or it's a documentary.
Think about, there's sound libraries that have tons of ambiances and things, but those aren't from your shoot.
Right.
So they're different. They're not the real thing, and it makes a difference, and you can tell the difference.
Yeah. And even if it's a bad camera mic, I tell people, please at least lay it in, give it to us, because, we can just lay it in as texture, and it gives it that just sense of realism, that sense of texture, that sense of another layer of real sound.
Well, and that brings us to the last point on this. If you record it, please deliver it to your mixer. It doesn't sound good if you record it, I know we got that room tone somewhere, but we don't have it.
Yeah.
That happens a lot too. It doesn't do any good if you leave it, in your Avid bin and don't send it. When you're doing interviews or talking head, maybe you're in an office, maybe you're a man on the street for documentaries and things like that. It's going to sound the best if you can find a room that has carpeting and curtains and is a dead room. If you have that option, and you got to listen for lighting, hums, noises that are picked up on the mic. Do you have any control? We talked about this already over the air conditioner. A lot of times if you're in a room like that has a desk with maybe some shelving and things, that does help break up the echo. You can move items around on the shelf, put some books on the shelf, things like that. They keep it from bouncing around. Donna, do you have any specific tips for recording interviews?
If it is a talking head interview and the interviewee is stationary, definitely setting up a boom, a mic stand to hold the boom, as opposed to holding it the whole time yourself, is going to save a lot of energy and then allows you to focus more on watching levels and listening. You're on the street and someone maybe is moving a little bit more, or you don't have the space or the time to be setting up a stationary boom. By all means, having someone standing there and holding it, totally fine. But if there's not a whole lot of movement and blocking happening, it's definitely worth saving your body a little grief and getting a mic stand there.
So when you're planning your production, and especially, if you're doing a film that has costuming involved, as opposed to maybe a documentary where you're just talking to regular people, but even then it matters. There are noisy materials and there are quiet materials. Silk is really noisy, and there's a lot of silk ties out there that people will stick lobs behind, and then you hear throughout the whole thing. Gore-Tex is really noisy if you're doing outdoor documentaries.
Starch.
Starched shirts, tight collars. Those are things you got to really be aware of. Leather jackets squeak. So but you just be aware of that. I mean, you don't want to say, make your costuming decisions based on your sound needs, but if you can, take sound into consideration when you're costuming. Also, clunky shoes with heels will add to the noise that you need to deal with later. Jewelry, bracelets, necklaces, earrings, those kind of things are things that, we're always having. What is that sound? What is that?
Yeah. And the one thing, when you say footsteps, is that we face a lot, especially independent film and in documentary, is that you want those footsteps there. You want to hear them. Okay. And that's great. If you know that your film is going to go somewhere where they have to have what they call fully filled music and effects, meaning if they mute the dialogue, they want to hear the film. So in other words, what has to happen to get that is you have to Foley those footsteps. If it's something that you can avoid and then just add in, that's great, because a lot of times what we'll do is if we can't take them out, we have to do 2 passes to get to fulfill that DME. So it's kind of a big issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's bigger than you think.
What, this is just off the top of my head, but I never thought of this before. Do you ever get wild sound of people walking?
I do
Yeah.
sometimes. Yeah.
Like, is that something that's good to do? Like, if you have somebody in a scene who they're walking up and down the hall, they're talking or whatever, to get wild sound of just them walking with no dialogue?
No, I don't think it's worth the film time.
Yeah.
I don't think it's worth, I mean, if you have a good Foley artist, they can do that really quickly.
Right.
So it's not really.
So
it's
it
not
would take you just as much time in post to add that in as it would to do it right.
Yeah. I would just do it right. But one thing about the interview that we forgot to mention that I've had problems with, that wasn't on your list, is chairs. If you're in a chair that squeaks or they move and they creak, sometimes it's impossible to get that out, like without destroying the voice. So, be careful that they're not in a chair that squeaks or it's rocky or anything like that if they're sitting down.
Mic technique. This is what we were saying earlier. Dialogue is king. Your goal is a clean recording of your actor's voice with little or no background noise, no distracting echoes or reflections. You want to get it as clean as possible before you go into the mix. And the way you do that with a boom is, we mentioned this already, but it can't be said too much. Get the mic in as close as possible. Every inch counts. That'll help mitigate background noise, echo from the room, things going on around you. The thing that I do basically is, you ride the frame, you get the boom as close as possible. If you're not risking getting the mic in the shot, then you're not getting close enough. I usually will pick a spot behind the actor that I can hang the mic over and line that up with it, and then drop it down till it's in the shot, and then pull it back up and watch that spot and try and keep the mic right on that spot. But basically as close as possible. Don't worry as much about, we're not getting the right spatial perspective, or not getting the natural reverb of the room if we get too close. That's the kind of stuff you can add in post really easily, but you can't get rid of it as easily.
And along the lines too of getting that mic line of where you're in the shot, where you're not, I do the same thing of picking something in the background that I can kind of focus on of, okay, this is where I need to stay to be good. Like an edge of a picture frame, or a turn in the wall, or some kind of detail that can help me as a visual marker, so I know I don't dip below during the shot. And then also too, if I'm not behind the camera and I can't see the frame that's being created, asking the grip or the AC, someone who's helping the cinematographer, because if I can, I don't want to distract them from what they're doing. They've got a lot to set up for the next shot. So if I can ask someone who's assisting, then I feel like it's maybe less of a nuisance, and I can get the information I need maybe faster, and I'm not distracting the cinematographer from the work that they need to be doing. That's definitely critical, is getting that boom line. The main thing with booming too is to keep it overhead as much as you can. That really, you shouldn't be booming from below unless there are like no other options. Like the only times that I've really boomed from below was being in a basement and it was a wide shot. There was nowhere for me to go to be hidden without a shadow or the boom in line. No matter if I got up super high, like the ceiling was just in the shot. So at that point, like, yeah, maybe I need to boom from below. But it's not always ideal, because you can get more bassy frequencies since it's going to be closer to the person's chest instead of their mouth. So you're going to hear more of the bass coming from their chest. And then you also run the risk of getting jewelry sounds if that's part of their attire for the day. So definitely booming overhead is going to be the best move. And when you boom, to have fluid movements, you don't want to be too rigid standing there, because you're going to need to be moving around. And the more fluid you can be, the less likely you are to accidentally jostle the boom pole and get a sound of a cord hitting the pole, which might make a noise, or Also, for example, I would take off my ring that I'm wearing right now when I'm booming, because if I accidentally knock that ring on the boom pole, it's going to get recorded into the tape, and another thing to clean up in post, so we don't want to have to worry about. So I wear minimal jewelry as a location mixer when I'm booming, because there's just no need for it.
So after talking about boom techniques and location settings, we got into a pretty extensive discussion about lav technique, how to place a lav and how to use a lav. And now the problem child. Generally, if you put the mic capsule over the talent's sternum, it gives you kind of a good balance between proximity and natural sound. But again, it depends, listen for costume noises, be careful of cable noise. Hairy guys with a mic on their chest, you can actually hear it rubbing against their hair. Those are things you need to think about. A little technique is to tie a loose knot below the mic, about an inch below the mic. That'll reduce the cable movement. It acts like an absorber. You tie a loose knot in the mic cable before you run it down to the transmitter.
Yeah, I definitely do that as well. Helps a lot.
Yeah. And so you attach the lav. You can use gaffer's tape to attach it to clothing. If you attach it directly to the body, you can use moleskin or medical adhesive. You can hide the lav in the collar or under their clothes or behind a men's tie. So sometimes you can attach it to someone's glasses. So the nice thing about a lav is it's omnidirectional. So it doesn't really have to be pointing directly at where the person's talking. You can move it around a little to get the least amount of noise. You'll still get a good signal. You can even point it down if you're getting like plosives and T's and popping sounds. You can flip it around and you'll still get a decent signal. There's a little technique of taking first aid tape and folding it into a triangle and setting the mic on that triangle and then doing another one on top of it to make a little sandwich. So the mic capsule will poke out from these two triangles of tape that are stuck to the person's body. And that'll help eliminate a lot of noise because it won't move around. Actually.
Exactly. Yeah. Because one piece of tape's on their chest and the other's on the clothing. So it's creating that buffer between the two. So there's not the rustle that you would get of just the mic straight on the clothing. And I do all of those things when I'm making somebody with a lav. And also too, I think that it's always nice to ask costuming or the talent, if they're just wearing their street clothes or they're bringing their costume, if you can tape stuff to their clothing. I mean, ideally, your tape won't leave any residue. And like you said, moleskin, definitely for skin only. Moleskin will leave residue on clothing, especially depending on the material. But I think it's just kind of nice to make sure that it's all good. You don't want to ruin like a costume that someone spent hours sewing or something. And then also when miking somebody, especially with the rise of the pandemic, I always like to be like really forthcoming and communicative of how I'm going to mic somebody, where I'll be touching them, like, because you get really up close and personal. I mean, I've had to, lace a lav mic up a lady's dress. And I mean, at least since I'm a woman, then it makes it a little bit like more normal, I guess. But yeah, and so things like that, or I've like to put lav mics on the little piece between the cups on a bra for women, because if you have a lower cut shirt, it's harder to hide the lav mic. And I found that putting it there, it stays put pretty well. There's not as much like stretch to the fabric or anything. And it leaves a good amount of space between the shirt and the microphone as well. So it's a good place to put it, but it can be kind of awkward to mic somebody like that. So I just like to, explain to people what I'm going to be doing. Hey, I need to, put this here. Is this cool? And most actors are like, oh yeah, totally. It's fine. I'm so used to this. But if it's an interview or if it's someone where this is their first time on set, they might not be used to it.
The third technique on a set with miking, besides boom and lav, is plants, and meaning planted mics, not house plants.
But you can plant the mic in the house plant.
House plant, right?
Do some first.
So you can use any mic as a plant. I mean, you could put a lav in there. If you're shooting in a car, a lot of times we'll put a lav in the sun visor. So you can hide a lav in there. You could hide a boom in between the console, pointing up. I did a shoot once in a church with a super wide shot. There was no way to get a boom in there. It was a wedding. So you stuck the boom in the,
lectern?
the priest was holding the Bible, and we cut a hole in it and stuck the boom right in there, and it worked great.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah. And it was we put a wireless transmitter on it. So there's no cabling, and he's holding the Bible and the boom was right in there. So,
oh, that's brilliant.
yeah, it actually worked pretty well. But yeah, so you can, plant mics anywhere, always work the shot. As a sound person, when you get a script, the first thing you're going to go through is through it. Yeah. And see what considerations am I going to have? When you look at that script, you go, oh, we're shooting in a church. How tight is the shot going to be? Am I going to be able to get a boom in there? How many, how big is the audience? Can I go to the location in advance?
And as an audio post person, I love to be involved during the pre-pro. And so one of the things I love to get, because obviously I don't have footage or actual shot anything because it's not happening yet, is the script. And then I can go through and I actually can say, oh, this is a really great scene. We can try to do this. Can you get this sound, this sound, this sound? Or if I see a shot and go, you need to be careful of that. So I think it's really, really important to talk to your whole sound team before you shoot, if at all possible. I know that sometimes your audio post person is not selected when you go to shoot, but if you know who you're mixing with, go ahead and talk to that person or that team and figure that out before you go out in the field.
That's a really great point, to get your post mixer involved in the pre-pro process.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times it doesn't happen. A lot of times it's like, oh, we're editing this film. We're going to need post on it. We need audio on it. When are you available?
Yeah.
But if you, like Cheryl said, if you know who you're going to be working with, or you don't know who you're going to be working with, you might want to look into post-production audio during the pre-pro process. It really will help. Some other things about plants is, you could bury you can run cables. If you're shooting outside, you could put mics in trees. You could put mics in mailboxes. And then you just have to bury the cables or run the cables so they're not in shot if you're not using wireless. The rule of thumb when I'm on location, and Donna can probably speak to this even more so, is I'll set up the booms first, make sure that they're ready to go. Then I'll set up the plants, and I'll leave the wireless mics and the lavs for last because the actors are still going through makeup, getting their costumes ready, whatever they're doing. So the last thing to go are the lavs, except if there's some kind of weird costuming thing where you're going to have to get that lav on there and wired up before they get dressed. So that's kind of the order I tend to work.
I just want to make sure I can get everything done as quickly as possible so that when people are ready, when everyone's ready to go, that they're not waiting on me for sure. So I think that's a good order of things to do is boom, plant, lavs.
Yeah, it's like mitigate as much stress as possible as early as possible, right? Well, and that also goes back to the location thing. If you know what locations you're going to be shooting and you have the time, if you can go out there ahead of time and see what you're going to be dealing with, that's really helpful too. And now my favorite subject, gear. We talked a lot about microphones. There's different kinds of microphones. There's dynamic microphones and condenser mics. Mostly what we've been talking about have been condenser mics, lavs, and shotgun mics. A dynamic mic is a less expensive, more rugged type of mic. It uses a plastic membrane that the sound waves hit instead of a metal one, and it's less affected by temperature and humidity. The reason why you might want to use a dynamic mic like a Shure SM57 or an SM58 on a shoot would be if you're doing a maybe musical application, you're shooting a band, or there's high volume effects like gunfire or engines or airplanes. Dynamic mics work great for that. For the most part, your microphones will be condenser mics, but it doesn't hurt to have with you an SM58 or something in case you need it. The condenser mic will overload a lot easier, but they're great at picking up softer sounds, dialogue. Uh, and also a condenser mic requires external power source called phantom power. And it's called phantom power because it gets the power through the XLR cable. You don't need to plug it into anything, but your recorder will generally supply that. Condenser mics give you a wider frequency range. A dynamic mic gives you ability to have more energy hitting the microphone. The mic patterns. The mics have varying characteristics of directionality. That's what we call polar patterns or pickup patterns. And the most common types of mics used for production are omnidirectional. They pick up sound from all the way around, and that's what lavs are. No matter what direction they're facing in, you're still getting the sound from them. A unidirectional mic picks up sound in a very narrow, pointed pattern, usually called a cardioid, supercardioid, or hypercardioid. And that's what shotguns are hypercardioid mics. It's called cardioid because it's a heart-shaped pattern, cardio. So a shotgun mic has a very narrow range, and if you move that out of the way, you're going to start going off mic. But if you're pointing right at that person, you're getting the most energy. A wider pattern will give you more leeway to move the mic around, but you get less energy in any given spot. So that's the difference between when you're looking at mics and they say, oh, this is an omnidirectional mic, this is a hypercardioid mic. That's what it means.
And you do have some mics that can be more than one polar pattern. So you can even have a figure 8 where you can, it actually looks like a figure 8 pattern. So on the mic, you can have one person talking into the mic this way and another person talking into the mic that way. So, but on the sides, it's not capturing any audio. Sometimes they even have little settings physically on the mic. So, when you set it up, make sure that you set it up so that you know where your settings are.
Right. There'll be a switch on the mic. Recorders. You can record into your camera if you're coming out of your recorder on your mix or a mixer with a mic attached, but it's best not to use, like we mentioned, to use your camera as your sole recording source. Have a separate recorder with a built-in mixer or a mixer that's feeding a recorder.
If you spend any time at all on a film set, you've probably heard somebody say, oh, we'll fix it in post. So we spent some time discussing what you can and can't fix in post and what's involved with that.
What you can and can't fix in post. We kind of talked about a lot of this already. And the question, can I fix this problem? The answer is usually, it depends. Things you can change, you can fix. If you have changing ambience during shots, that's fixable. And again, the room tone, nat sound that you record really helps that. We've already talked about this quite a bit, but that's fixable. If you did one shot in the morning and another shot in the afternoon and the birds come and go or whatever, we can fix that. But get the room tone, get the nat sound, that helps out a lot. What you can't fix, excessive background noise or the ambience is louder than the dialogue. There's some amazing noise reduction tools and things that you can do to try and bring out the dialogue, but you cannot add something that doesn't exist. If you're too far away from your dialogue source, you won't be able to beef it up really. And so, and overuse of noise reduction tools starts to sound really sterile and robotic, and it's not a great solution.
No, and also one thing I want to point out to a lot of people overlook is that when you're recording that room tone or you're recording that nat sound for us, there's two things really why that's important is that sometimes we hear noise when it goes away. So when you're editing and you're suddenly having to Frankenbite something together, or you want to put space or change the pacing of the way the actor or the interviewer actually said it, then you're going to be cutting it up. And then suddenly you're going to have space or silence on that track between the bites. And the most noticeable thing about noise is when it drops in and out. So that's one reason why we need those type of things. But the other reason that a lot of people overlook is if we have that, it's an easier way for us to sample the noise so that we can actually use it better in our noise reduction tools. That's why I always run it out of the same scene. Like if I feel like it's changing a lot, I'll just ask for a lot of handles when I get it from the editor, and I'll roll it out and I'll go, oh, there's a space right before they say that. And I grab that noise profile, and then I'm able to noise reduce properly the dialogue in a better way because I have that noise profile. And I think that's really, really important. And Steve is absolutely right. What you can't do is suddenly take something that's really deep in the noise floor and then suddenly make it this really nice, clean, intimate conversation. I mean, that's just not going to happen. There is a lot of ways that we can hide overly processed voices cleaned up. Like it's really, really hard to make them sound good if you're not going to have a small little music bed underneath there. There's a lot of things that we can do to make it sound a little bit better, but you will always be sacrificing quality. So that's why I always ask, like, is this going to be under music, or do you play any of pretty music there? And sometimes, you're not. That's just the way it is.
Hiss, hum, fluorescent lights, air conditioner, 60 cycle home. We can usually get rid of that pretty easily.
Cicadas.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Wind, that stuff you can get rid of. Distortion on the recording, mic overload, too hot, not as much. There's some things you could do, but again, it's going to take up a lot of your post-production time. It's going to cost you more effort, more money, more time. That's better spent going into creative sound rather than technical fixing of sound. So if you can avoid it, best to avoid it. Low level recording, that's better. That's easier to fix than overly modulated recording, but it does bring up the noise floor. Then you got to deal with mitigating the noise. And again, it's more time and effort in post-production that best to avoid if you can.
If you're talking to your audio person before production, then, they could actually mark up your script and say, this is definitely what we're going to need in that. This is what we're going to need in sound design. Hey, can you think about this? Can you think about that? Can you grab that? Foley, if you're going to do true Foley, meaning you're going to have a Foley artist actually act out to the scenes and record while they're doing it, or you're going to do what I call poor man's Foley, which I do all the time because I don't have a true Foley fit, but I can make sounds all the time using the Zoom or whatever mic I have on hand, even my phone sometimes. And not actually admitted that. And then, or on set, like if you need certain Foley sounds, like somebody tapping on whatever, you could actually record those on set and then add those in later. So, there's lots of different ways to handle that.
There are so many other topics related to audio that we talked about that we don't have time to cover in this podcast. Things like immersive audio, surround sound, file deliverables, and what you need to tell your editor in order to get the things you need from your video editor for post-production audio. But that will be a topic for another day. Be sure and join us for our next episode, which will feature another in our series, How I Got It Made, with Jane Barbara and Sherry Raddick Stroud, coming next week.
Thank you for listening to Media and Monuments, a service of Women in Film and Video in Washington, D.C. Please remember to review, rate, and subscribe wherever you listen to this podcast. For more information about WIF, please visit our website at WIF as in Frank, V as in Victor.org.